Annie Walker was slowly making her way towards her gate through Changi Airport in Singapore. Her 10-day trip to Vietnam had gone well, and she was eager to get back to Melbourne, though she had no real reason to hurry home to her husband. Her new, small, rolling case, which was purchased just for this trip, was being pulled easily behind her. She was still wearing her nice work suit since she hadn't had a chance to change prior to leaving the company site that morning. It fit her well, though she wished there was a way for it to minimize her arse, which had grown over the last few years. Sigh. Her comfortable low heels clicked away as she walked along. She had finished her dinner and now had to wait several more hours for her late-night, 7-hour flight home to Melbourne. She had always wanted to travel. She wasn't exactly enjoying it at the moment. As many had advised her, she made sure she ate dinner before the restaurants and cafes began closing for the evening. Now, with that activity out of the way, she had several hours in front of her before she could board her plane, take her sleeping pills, and try to get some sleep. On her way to her gate, she could hear someone skillfully playing the public piano, which she had noticed sitting unattended on her outbound trip. As she approached, she immediately picked up the Christmas tune Carol of the Bells and was impressed to hear it being adeptly played. Almost 3 weeks from Christmas, it was appropriately timed. As she approached, she saw a man that looked to be in his 40s in a nice dress shirt and khakis, looking very relaxed but sad as his fingers, one of which wore a wedding band, pranced across the ivories. There was an audience of maybe 7 or 8 that clapped when he finished the song. He nodded his thanks and began Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, while some of the audience moved on and new travelers arrived. Annie saw that he had a tablet on the piano displaying the sheet music, which he only appeared to reference occasionally. She knew that she should move on to her gate and read for a few hours to try and wind down before attempting to sleep, but she stayed to watch a little longer, feeling the need to let the music get her into more of a Christmas spirit. When he started playing the next song, "O Come All Ye Faithful," she was moved. One of her favorite songs, and in a place where nobody knew her, she took a few steps forward and began. O come ye to Bethlehem. O come and behold him, born the King of Angels. The gentleman playing jerked when she began, but only missed a note or two before he settled back in, smiling at the keyboard. As she sang, the relaxed demeanor of his playing changed. There was less prancing of his fingers, and a much more impassioned playing followed. Within a few bars, what had been background music quickly became a performance. With Annie singing, the audience grew, and by the end of the song, what had been 7 or 8 became 15 to 20. When they finished, he turned to her, still smiling, and said, "Thank you. You sing wonderfully. Please sing another?" She just nodded. "You pick." She asked, "Can you play the Christmas song?" A few taps on his tablet and he began the first note. Annie sang beautifully and soulfully. Suddenly she was in the Christmas mood and pulled from her memories of good Christmases to fuel her performance. He was enthralled and could hear a longing in her voice, wondering about this stranger that was revealing a small portion of herself in front of the crowd. Few words were spoken in between songs, and for the next half hour, they continued to treat the small crowd that had now assembled. A few phones were recording, but most observers simply stood, smiled, and occasionally clapped. When a little girl and her brother approached them and asked if they could play Frosty the Snowman, the spell was broken. The girl and her brother joined in the singing, and soon the whole crowd had joined in. A few more playful carols and the pianist stood to wrap up for the evening. Almost immediately the little girl jumped onto the bench and began pecking out a few notes. Annie asked, "Can I buy you a drink, or do you have to go to your gate?" He put on his blazer, and with an expression she couldn't quite read, he replied, "I'd like that." It was very late, and all the nearby restaurants and bars were closed. They found a convenience stand that sold sodas, water, and snacks, but not much else. He asked, "How long until your flight?" She replied, "Almost 3 hours. I know a place around the corner still open." He held out his arm, and she accepted, wondering where they were going, but was willing to go along, knowing she could always back out if she changed her mind. A minute later they were entering an airline airport lounge. It was very swanky, very nice, and relatively empty. He showed them his ID, and after verifying his flight, he and his guest were allowed inside. At the bar, they ordered their drinks and found a couple of comfortable chairs to relax. She said, "Thank you. I'm kind of embarrassed to go from almost buying you a water to falling into this place." Don't be. Before and after COVID, I average almost 5,000 miles per week, so this airline loves me. It's one of the few perks I consider worthwhile. American? He nodded and asked, Australian? She smiled, good guess. Ever been to Australia? I got lost in Sydney once. And you? Do you travel often? No. This is my first trip out of the country. I've always wanted to travel but never had the chance. The only reason I was on this trip was because nobody else in my company wanted to go to middle of nowhere Vietnam for just over a week. They needed help setting up their new accounting system, so I volunteered. My name is Annie. And you are? Gerald, but my friends call me Jerry. She gave him a sly smile and presumed to say, Nice to meet you, Jerry. He smiled in return, You sing beautifully. I wondered if you perform for a living. She let out an unladylike snort and said, Don't be daft, but thank you. I'm just an accountant. I don't have the opportunity to perform very often, usually just with family or as a dare at a bar. That was very nice. I enjoyed getting to do that. You should do it more often. It was wonderful. Thanks again. How about you? It was like you shifted gears when I started singing. He gave her a bittersweet smile and replied, You inspired me. So you don't play piano for a living? It was his turn to scoff. No. I'm an engineer. I implement robotic automation systems. I was in Malaysia for a couple of weeks, but I'm going home a few days early. This is my daughter's last year of high school, and I want to hear her perform in her school's Christmas concert. She's one of the lead singers. It was his turn to notice a sad smile on her face, and he asked her, How about you? I see rings. Married? Children? Married, yes. Children, no. He nodded. Trying to lighten the mood, he said, Even though I'm married to a blonde, I love your red hair. I've always thought redheads were special. He had hoped to get a smile from the compliment, but he didn't. Thank you for that. My husband used to feel the same way, but not lately. He started calling me his ranga. He tries to say it in a teasing way, but I know it's meant derogatory. It's short for orangutan since they usually have an orange tint. In Australia, it can be used positively or negatively. He thinks he's being witty. I think he's being an arse. He, too, thought her husband must be an ass, because he thought she was quite pleasant to look at, guessing that she was around 30 years old. He said, Oh. I'm sorry to hear that. I think it's beautiful. Slightly uncomfortable with the compliments, the subject was changed yet again. She asked, Do you get tired of the travel? I'd like to travel more, but it sounds like you do a lot of it. Another melancholy look crossed his face. There is a happy medium somewhere, but I never found it. It has worn on me and my family. Some of that was my choosing and some was not. I'm well paid for what I do and have done well over the years, but the cost has been very high. I've stuck with it for the money, but I'm ready to take a break for a while, recharge my batteries. I'm sorry to hear that. He shrugged his shoulders. Do you and your husband have any big plans for Christmas? I confess that I have no idea what an Aussie Christmas would be like. My visit to Sydney was during your fall, your autumn. Probably only a little different from yours. It will probably be warm and sunny, and we'll have a big dinner with our families. In Melbourne, a big cricket tournament, the Boxing Day test, kicks off, and my husband will disappear with a bunch of his mates for that. I'll go shopping on Boxing Day with my mum. So not too different. I've always wanted to see a white Christmas. Have you ever experienced one? I live in Austin, so, no. Never. Certain parts of Texas can get a lot of snow, but usually not at Christmas, and never in Austin at Christmas. Maybe one day I'll travel somewhere to see one. Who knows? I'm not sure what life will bring once my little lady goes off to college. Jerry always marveled at his willingness to open up to strangers in airports and their willingness to reciprocate. There must be something about the anonymity and the extremely small chance of ever running into the other again that allowed for an unusual amount of sharing. Or maybe it was because there was so little intimacy in his own life that he needed to feel that connection with someone, anyone, even a stranger. She said, "There are a couple of places in South New Zealand up in the mountains that get the rare white Christmas. Maybe I'll go there one day." She paused only a moment before continuing, "I envy you. We couldn't have children. I'm sorry." He was about to question her further but decided not to get too personal, though. With Annie, that seemed like it would be easy. A small bond had been built between them during their performing together. He guessed it was one more bond that would be broken or melt away over time. Sigh. They continued to chat and got to know each other a little better. By the end of their discussion, they could each tell that the other was hurting. "After a while," she said, "my flight begins boarding in half an hour. I should probably start working my way towards the gate." He asked, "If the piano is available, would you sing one more song for me?" The piano was on the way, so she nodded and gave him a warm smile. She would sing for him, someone that enjoyed her singing. As they walked back to the piano, she thought he was a handsome man. Not gorgeous like a model nor an actor, but distinguished looking with mostly dark hair and a few stray grays mixed in near his ears. For someone who travels a lot, he was trim. He had a few lines around his gray eyes, which had conveyed many emotions to her, most with a little sadness mixed in, or maybe it was weariness. The piano was empty when they arrived, so there was no one around. He quickly pulled his tablet from his messenger bag and asked, "Any preference?" Having just shared some of their pains with each other, she asked, "I'm taking a chance here, but have you ever heard of My Immortal by Evanescence?" He knew it all too well. She said, "I usually only sing it in my car. I'm too afraid that if anyone ever heard me sing it, they'd know too much." He replied, "Believe it or not, on my longer trips, I will often pack a rollable keyboard because playing relaxes me. I've played that song many times." Jerry played the song very well, but it was Annie that poured herself into the performance. It was easy for him to see the pain on her face, especially as she sang. "When you cried, I'd wipe away all of your tears. When you'd scream, I'd fight away all of your fears. And I held your hand through all of these years. But you still have all of me. I've tried so hard to tell myself that you're gone. But though you're still with me, I've been alone all alone." It was how Jerry had felt for years. It nearly broke his heart to hear that Annie was in that much pain. All through the song, they performed for each other. It was a heartfelt and soulful display, conveying pain, loss, and loneliness. Jerry thought that their bond grew much stronger during that performance. He had enjoyed performing with her. Or more accurately, he had enjoyed her performing while he played. For Annie, she felt a little spark that she hadn't felt in some time. She wondered where Jerry had been all of her life. Even though he was taken, it made her wonder why she was still married. As he poured himself into the song, she suspected that if he was this familiar with it, he'd known many difficulties in his married life also. When they finished, the small audience that had gathered was surprised by the performance. There was vigorous applause from those that had watched the show. He asked, "Can I walk you to your gate?" Though tempted, she shook her head. "It's going to be difficult enough walking away as is." He understood because he felt the same way. As she prepared to turn towards her gate and he towards his, she grabbed his hand and pulled him in for a kiss. Though surprised, he did not resist. It was probably a curious sight to those that were still around after watching them perform together. It was a soulful kiss, full of passion and desire. For the briefest of moments, the airport and the onlookers melted away, leaving just two souls sharing their pain. After she broke away, she said, "I'll remember you." Then she quickly turned and began to stride away. 3 seconds later, she heard him call out, "Annie." When she turned, she heard him say, "You're beautiful." She allowed one of her rare smiles to escape onto her lips, and she turned to go to her gate with a confidence she didn't usually feel. She allowed the extra kilos that she hated carrying on her bum to swish just a bit more than she normally would. Instead of feeling like she needed to get away, now she felt good, for a change. "Thank you, God," she thought, "for allowing me to stumble across Jerry. It was the biggest boost to her confidence she had felt in a long time. As he watched that beautiful red hair and marvelous ass swish out of sight, he would remember her too. At her gate, she was overflowing with conflicting emotions. Guilt barely raised its hand. It made her want to re-examine her life and where she was in it. At 33 and a certified practicing accountant, similar to an American CPA, she was doing well, though not great, professionally. Personally? Sigh. Don't go there, Annie, she told herself. Only heartache will be found underneath those rocks. At least she didn't feel completely unattractive for a change. There was at least one man on the planet that appreciated her singing and thought she was beautiful. As soon as she boarded her plane, she downed her sleeping pills with a shot of vodka, put on her sleeping mask, and was sound asleep before the plane reached the runway. As the flight attendant took the items from her tray before takeoff, she saw a young woman wearing a sleeping mask with a small smile on her face. Arriving in Melbourne, nobody was there to greet her at the airport, as expected, and she arranged a taxi on her phone which drove her to her empty home. She had received a text from her husband, with Robbie playing a bit of footy before dinner. Of course, he was. Stupid wanker. She called her mum, who was eager to hear all about her trip. She had a good mother, though she was disappointed in her daughter by the lack of grandchildren. Annie didn't dare tell that it was Mike that couldn't produce offspring, not her. It would be scandalous for a male in the great line of walkers not to be able to sire a child. Oh no, it must be the little round wife's fault. She flamed red to match her flaming red hair when she thought of that. And adoptions were a no-no, too. Cannot raise a bastard child, Mike had said. Some days she wondered if he wasn't a bastard child also. Stop that, she would tell herself. It would be that much harder to stay married if she kept thinking that way. The holidays were good with the usual family gatherings. Mike's family, with the trappings of some wealth and some formality because of his grandfather's past representation in the capital, Canberra, was tolerable. Annie could barely contain her frustration with the looks of pity his sisters passed her way. Whether because of her lack of children or some other failing of hers, she didn't know. At her mum's, it was the usual love and joviality. While she was an only child, plenty of aunts, uncles, and cousins came along with many of her mum's neighbors. It was a rousing time. Several family members asked her to sing, and she chose to sing White Christmas a cappella. She poured her soul into that rendition, and her family was always amazed. This time, it wasn't the usual carol that they heard from her. Her family told her how wonderful that was, but did she hear a whispered show-off from the lips of her husband? Figures. He had never approved of her singing. It brought too much attention to her versus him. They had become an odd pair. When they met, she was an attractive enough redhead. Not a raving beauty, but Mike had fallen for her. When dating and after marrying, she loved his playfulness and physical attractiveness. He loved to play all kinds of sports and stayed in great shape. She often went to his matches to cheer him on. Afterwards, he would pour his attention on her, and his mates regularly told him how lucky he was. After discovering that he couldn't have children, his playfulness turned snarky. She had allowed her office environment, and her married life, to cause her to gain a few kilos, and now that their relationship struggled some. The Ranga comments, which were once playful, were more and more hurtful. After Christmas, her husband disappeared with his friends to the Boxing Day test, as expected. She shopped with her mom during Boxing Day and had a great time. The next day, she and some friends went to the beach. She almost didn't go, worrying that people would find her appearance lacking. Then she remembered, "You're beautiful," and decided she would go anyway. Her friends asked her what was different because she was behaving a little more vibrant and self-assured than they had recalled recently. One even asked if she was getting a little on the side. What? No. I'm not a cheater and never will be. She meant that, too. Work in Vietnam went well and my manager and her manager at HQ in Sydney both congratulated me. I'm not as completely useless as some people seem to think I am. Her friends were happy for her. They liked seeing her this way. Unfortunately, her husband was his same indifferent self. She actually had to attempt to get some sex from him, instead of the other way around. She wondered, Did he no longer desire her? Did he find her offensive? Was he getting it somewhere else? It hurt her terribly to think of that. He was supposed to love her, but ever since the doctor's visit, things between them were never quite the same. She wondered if he felt that way because he truly wanted children, or if his inability to have them pointed out some failing in him. Over the next several months, through summer and into the autumn, she tried to improve their marriage special dinners, going back to cheering Mike on at his matches, extra lingerie. Nothing seemed to make much of a difference. He thanked her for her efforts, but there was no reciprocity. He was more focused on mucking around with his mates or lazily trying to climb the ladder at the bank that his family managed. His father wanted him to knuckle down, grow up, and be more responsible. He was merely thinking about it. Annie didn't lose her confidence, however. Although she wasn't enjoying her marriage at the moment, she believed she could fix it. There was the tiniest of sparks that she held onto, knowing that somewhere on a planet of nearly 8 billion people, there was one man that believed in her. Autumn gave way to winter. Annie clung to her belief in herself, and it showed at work. Her work in Vietnam earned her another trip, but this time to a much nicer company location in Auckland, New Zealand for almost 2 weeks in late June. Her workmates were jealous of this trip. Apparently, her husband was, too, because he didn't approve of her going. Mike asked, "Why do you have to go?" "I want to go. It's good for my career. If it goes well, I may even get a promotion." Career? Don't I make enough at the bank? He was overpaid for his loan officer position at the bank, and they both knew it. She said, "Why can't you be happy for me? This is good for us. If I get a raise, it will allow us to get that boat you wanted." He did want a certain boat, but it bothered him that he needed his wife's help to pay for it. If his dad would just pay him more at the bank, he wouldn't need her help. The real problem was that even though he was considered the good-looking one in their relationship and had been considered a great catch when they were younger, his lack of career growth was now being contrasted to hers. His athletic attributes were at or slightly past their peak, while her musical voice continued to get stronger with age. He still had his family prestige, but he had relied on it for a long time. So, Mike needed for her to question herself a little so that he could continue to feel better about himself and his position as the superior one in their relationship. The past several months had put that into question. He replied, "I just don't understand why you want to be away so much. It's like you don't want to spend time with me?" She just looked at him stunned. That was rich. How obtuse could he be? He was the one that spent most of his free time blowing her off to be with his mates. She was the one forced to cook, clean, and then usually spend her free time with her mom or friends to keep from being so alone. "I'm always willing to spend more time with my husband. Why don't you arrange a date or two for us before I go and after I get back? I would love to spend more time with you." She looked at him defiantly. This was a different Annie from the one that was so nervous about going to Vietnam. He could see that her work there had changed her into a more determined woman. He wondered how her trip to Auckland would change her further. He said, "Okay. I'll do it." She knew that he wouldn't. He never did. Her trip was another success with more compliments and more responsibility. As a result, she was given an employee to help her develop her managerial skills. For years, she felt like her contributions were not being recognized. In the last 6 months, it seemed as if she had gone from a laggard to someone on the rise. Everyone noticed, including her manager, her colleagues, her friends, her family, and her husband. Mike seemed to think that spending time away from Annie would minimize the comparisons. It did not. Even in bed, the impact of her growth and confidence impacted them. What could have put them at odds resulted in some of the best sex of their lives. She wanted more and was determined to get it from Mike. He was happy to have a woman that was more active in the bedroom. Unfortunately, that was the only area of their marriage that improved. Everywhere else, the decay was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Annie began to seriously think about leaving Mike. She was trying to nurture their relationship, but their sex was not love. All questions about his work were quickly shut down. She had begun to resent even more the amount of time he spent with his friends playing stupid games. The byproduct of that was her burying herself in her own work to get ahead. If he wasn't at home, why should she be? By late November, she had just begun to resign herself to the fact that things with Mike were not going to improve when her manager asked her to join her in her office. They connected with her second-line manager in Sydney, who offered her a promotion in Sydney at headquarters. She was thrilled. She said she was interested but needed time to talk with her family and consider it. They congratulated her while her head swam. That Friday night, when Mike was out with his friends, again, she decided to go out with some of her girlfriends. She met the girls in a nice restaurant, not a bar nor a club, but they were the most boisterous ones there. The self-assured Annie joined right in. She wanted to tell them about the job offer but wanted to speak to her mom first. She had a good idea of what she was going to do. Natalie, or Nat, her longest-known friend, said to the group, "Hey, have they found out any more about the guy that put up those billboards?" Annie asked, "What billboards?" Nat looked at her incredulously, "What billboards? Have you been living under a rock?" "Oh, you have, because you've been at work for most of the last month, and this isn't the kind of thing that Mike would talk about. I cannot believe you haven't heard about it on the radio. Every time a woman approaches and tries to talk to him, he just smiles and keeps on playing." "Playing? Playing what?" Beverly, another friend, said, "I've heard that he's had at least a dozen marriage proposals since he started." An exasperated Annie demanded, "Started what?" Beverly made a few swipes and taps on her phone and showed Annie the message on one of the billboards that they said were replicated in a dozen places around the city. Annie spewed the wine from her mouth upon seeing it and whispered, "Oh my God." Jerry's trip home was uneventful. Like Annie, 3 sleeping pills and 2 mini bottles of Kahlua later, and he was comatose on the long flight droning over the Pacific. He spent a layover at LAX in another lounge, then a few more hours to Austin. While he was tired of the travel, his work, and his wife, he was looking forward to seeing his daughter, Sarah, and watching her perform. He was sure his arriving home several days early to watch her perform would be a pleasant surprise. The Uber dropped him and his luggage at home, and when he opened the garage, he was the one that was surprised that Sarah's and Linda's cars were gone. It was 7 a.m., so he must have just missed them, but the garage was missing the smell of a recently started vehicle. Curious, he thought. He turned off the alarm, and when he went inside, everything looked in place. He decided to text Sarah. "Hey Pumpkin, all ready for your show tonight?" "I am. All of my clothes are laid out on my bed for when I get back from school. I wish you were going to be here." "Me too. Tell Kelly good luck from me. She'll really like that. She misses you too, you know. I'm driving her to school again this morning. Love you, Dad." "Love you, too." He didn't text Linda. Why bother? He smiled. She was at Kelly's. That made sense. She was such a good young lady. Kelly was her best friend, and their friendship had lasted over a decade. They had met at a local musical theater program when they were little and became best friends through that. Unfortunately, a few years ago, Kelly and her mom were in a terrible accident that had killed her mom and severely injured Kelly. The doctors were able to save her leg and foot, but they basically had to piece and pin it back together. She still had one of the sweetest signing voices in her school, but she would never dance again, nor walk without a limp nor a cane. It was too bad because she was such a loving and caring girl. His whole family loved her. The previous year, during COVID, she had stayed for many months with them. Jerry couldn't travel, so he stayed home and did most of his work on Zoom. Kelly's dad is a surgeon, and he didn't want to potentially expose his daughter to anything he might pick up at the hospital, so she stayed with them 10 out of 13 months before things mostly returned to normal after the vaccines were rolled out. While Jerry actually enjoyed her staying with them, it had been an uncomfortable time. Or at least everyone seemed uncomfortable. Jerry tried to reassure her that she was always welcome and to stay as long as she needed to. He did enjoy watching the interaction between Sarah and Kelly. They were more like sisters than friends. When Jerry had arrived home from his last trip before COVID, as cases were spiking and governors were shutting things down, Linda decided that she would sleep in one of the guest bedrooms to ensure that if one of them got COVID from their normal grocery and errand running, then at least one of them could stay up and going. Given the poor state of their relationships, Jerry didn't really complain. It had been years since things had been good between them. He wondered if that was what had Kelly on edge. Or maybe it was her dad working at the hospital which was bothering her. He thought it would probably bother him too. The only time Linda stayed in the same room with him was when Kelly stayed at her home. Apparently, Linda was willing to take a risk for some intimacy. As their relationship had struggled, Jerry was accustomed to long periods without closeness. He didn't complain when Linda would visit him those few nights and seek his company because he also appreciated her presence. If anything good could come from COVID, he proved to his managers that he could still be effective remotely. When the COVID travel lockdowns ended, he returned to his road warrior ways because some clients urgently needed his on-site assistance, but now, he was much more in control, hence his coming home several days early this time. Having skipped an airport coffee to rush home, he decided to brew some now and maybe eat a bite of cereal before getting busy. He brewed his usual French press of coffee and poured the bowl of cereal. When he pulled the milk from the fridge, he was confused. He could tell by the date that it was the same container that had been there when he left home a little over 2 weeks earlier. The container was almost empty, and when he opened it to smell, he could tell that it had already gone bad. That was odd. Sarah usually went through a half-gallon a week on her own. He opened the fridge again, but there wasn't any other milk. As he continued to look, he saw 2 shriveled and black avocados. Were those from the same batch that he had bought? Also, the green onions in the veggie drawer were watery and slimy. What the hell? That would mean. He found his phone and opened the security app. He tapped the history icon and his stomach rolled. Since the day after he left, no one had been in his house. He had spoken to Linda on the phone twice, and both times that he FaceTimed Sarah, she had been in her car. Remembering what Sarah had said earlier, he trudged his way to Sarah's bedroom. There were no clothes laid out for that night's Christmas performance. A little snooping in closets and bathrooms revealed that Linda and Sarah were missing some clothes or they were being stored elsewhere. He opened the location app that would allow him to see Sarah's phone, and she was on her way to school. He didn't bother to try to locate Linda, because she had blocked him a couple of months before COVID started. Now what? What did it all mean? Think, Jerry. They haven't been home in 2 weeks, he thought. So, they are staying somewhere else. The most likely explanation: Linda is getting ready to serve him with divorce papers when he gets home, but 2 weeks? He had a better idea now. It appeared that she had already found someone else, and had moved in there, but she still had most of her clothes in her closet. And that would mean that Sarah knows what's going on. He wondered, why didn't Sarah tell me? It was pretty obvious to him that his plan to divorce Linda after Sarah left for college had been moved up by 6 to 9 months. He had expected the divorce to come. Neither he nor Linda used that word directly, but things had been so bad for so long that it wasn't that big a surprise. What was beginning to anger him, though, was that he had planned to spend most of the next 6 months working from the Austin office, with only a few short domestic trips so he could spend more time with Sarah as she worked her way towards graduation. Linda would have a fight on her hands if she tried to take Sarah away these last few months. He shook his head. That presumed that Sarah wanted to stay with him, and given how much he had been gone the last few years, maybe she wouldn't want to. Damn. Staying away from Linda was on purpose. Now he wondered if he had screwed himself when it came to his daughter. But she, and often with Kelly, always seemed happy to FaceTime him and do things with him when he was home. He was confused. I guess I'll just have to talk to Sarah, was the only option he felt that he had. Clearly talking to the lying skank Linda would do no good. Now what? He guessed he needed to wash his clothes and pick up a few groceries. Then he would get to work or maybe play on his piano a little. Sigh. Welcome home, Jerry, he thought. He would attend Sarah and Kelly's Christmas program that night. He expected it to be enlightening. On the way to the program, he picked up some flowers to give Sarah and Kelly after the performance. He knew what kind Sarah liked, but wasn't sure about Kelly, so he would give her the same thing. To ensure that he didn't accidentally bump into anyone he knew, he sat in the balcony section of the school's large auditorium. He was tempted to peek over the edge while the lights were still up to see if he could spot Linda, but he had always been a patient man, so he placed the flowers in the empty seat next to him and ensured that his binoculars were clear. Rather than record the concert himself, he knew that the school would charge an arm and a leg for a copy of the performance, but it was in 4K and the quality was always very good, so he wasn't going to complain too much. He could afford it, and it was so worth it this time. Sarah sang like an angel, not that he was a biased father or anything, but his realizing that this would be one of her last performances nearly brought tears to his eyes. Kelly sang well, also. He would have to congratulate Robert, Kelly's father, on her performance. At the end of the show, as the students were dispersing, he watched as Sarah was with Kelly and was helping her down the steps leading from the stage. They were all smiles looking at each other. At the base of the steps, he saw Sarah hug Linda and then Robert. Robert hugged and picked up his girl, who pretended to be indignant. What happened next made everything much clearer. Linda handed Robert 2 roses, and he gave one to each girl. Apparently, Robert didn't know that lilies were Sarah's favorite flower. Jerry watched as Linda put her arm through Robert's, who then leaned down and kissed her. Linda quickly looked around as if people might see them, but nobody appeared to be paying them any attention, so she pulled him back for a quick kiss on the lips, grinning like an idiot. That show of affection knocked the smile from the girls' faces, and they said something to Robert and Linda. The girls seemed to shrug off the few quick words from Linda, in reply. Jerry could feel his blood begin to boil, though he wasn't sure why. This was who Linda was, so why was he surprised? He didn't appreciate being made a fool in front of the school. Not that either of them knew many parents at the school, but still. Now he wondered how long this had been going on. Since COVID ended? During COVID? Before COVID? No matter. For a moment he watched as the 4 of them conversed with several other students and parents. Not knowing how long Linda and the girls would be sticking around, he quickly walked down the back stairs, through the front door, and out towards his car. The flowers for the girls were tossed to the ground, in his wake. Back inside, Sarah was pleased that the show had gone well. She wished her father could have seen it. She knew he would buy a copy, but it isn't the same thing. Maybe she would call him later once they returned to Kelly's house. She thanked Robert for the rose but was irritated with her mother for the affection that was being shown between her and Robert. It was too soon. Word could still get back to her daddy. She didn't want him hurt, much less humiliated. Her mom didn't seem so concerned. Kelly alternated between using her cane and leaning on Sarah. Kelly wasn't happy with her dad either. She was purposefully using the special cane that Jerry had given her. He had used his contact with one of the companies he worked with to have a special carbon fiber quad cane made for her. It had a trispiral central column connecting to the carbon fiber quad base. The handle was a durable stiff rubber but had been notched in a beautiful diamond pattern to make it easier to grip and more elegant as a quad cane can be. The entire thing was in black. It was a third of the weight, and much, much slimmer than the gaudy aluminum one the hospital gave her, and many adults asked her where she got it because they had a loved one who would appreciate something like that. Kelly was thinking, yes, Dad, I'm reminding you that you're screwing the wife of my best friend's dad, and I'm not happy about what the 2 of you are doing. As they made their way out the front of the school and towards the cars, Sarah was surprised to see lilies strewn across the ground. They were her favorite and she hated seeing that someone had dropped them. Maybe she wouldn't call her father that night. She would feel too guilty. Later that evening, Jerry could see that Sarah's phone spent the night at Robert's house. He spent an hour pouring his soul into his piano until he was calm enough to take a sleeping pill and go to sleep. Jerry worked all the next day from his home office. He wasn't supposed to be home for 2 more days. That evening, he sent Sarah a text. Hey Pumpkin, could you go down to my home office and take pictures of the few papers in the red file on my desk and send them to me? I wouldn't ask if it weren't really important. She replied. Sure, Daddy. Give me a few minutes, and I'll text them to you. He knew it was only about 5 minutes to Robert's house, and he wasn't disappointed. To Sarah's eyes, when she arrived at her home, nothing looked out of place. After entering the garage, she turned off the alarm and went inside. The timer on the Christmas tree had turned on. The house lamps were on also, according to the schedule that had been set. She checked the handle on the patio door, and it was still locked. Good, she thought. Nothing was unusual until she clicked on the light in her father's home office, because there, sitting behind his desk, was her father. Oh, fuck. She nearly jumped out of her skin. Daddy. Hi, Sarah. What are you doing home? I thought you were going to be gone 2 more days. Well, daughter, I live here. At least for the moment. I think the real question though. She was already starting to tear up, is where have you and your mother been sleeping? Shit. 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 Now she was really bawling. It was no act either. She loved her daddy and didn't know what was about to happen. She knew this day was coming, but not like this. She had hoped she would have graduated before this day came. As angry as he was at his wife, he was cautiously optimistic that his daughter would always love him, but he suspected he was about to learn if that was true or not. He held open his arms for his daughter, and she ran to him, scooching onto his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck and hugging onto him for dear life. He just let her go on for several minutes until she finally had herself under control. She whispered, "I'm so sorry, Daddy. I never wanted you to get hurt. It's a little late for that, but clearly I've upset whatever your mother had planned, so I'm hoping someone will tell me the truth for a change. Will you, pumpkin? No matter how bad you might think I'll be hurt, I really need for someone I trust to tell me where things stand." She nodded her head into his chest and said, "Will you sit with me in the family room by the Christmas tree? I would be more comfortable in there." Okay. They took up their regular spots, he in his chair and a half and her on the love seat. She asked, "Where do you want me to begin? I guess what I'm most interested in is what are you planning on doing? Then, it might be nice to know when did she and Robert become a couple and when did she plan to have me served, assuming you know." You know about Robert? Oh, God. Okay. I think I know those answers. I'm going to go back to where I think it began. You had been gone so much before COVID hit. You were home a lot before my freshman year, but when school started that year, it was like you disappeared China, Cambodia, Dubai, Spain, Mexico. You were literally circling the earth. I loved FaceTiming you, but it wasn't the same as your being here. Mom was her usual self, so I started hanging around over at Kelly's. During the fall, Dr. Janice invited me to stay and eat dinner with them several times, and I accepted. He and Kelly asked Mom on multiple occasions to join us. I think that was what started it. When you were gone, the 4 of us were usually there. We didn't sleep there, then, but we spent a lot of time there. You and Mom have always loved Kelly, so all of us spending time together didn't seem that unusual. Then, I noticed on some of the nights that Kelly and I returned late from going out or studying, Mom was still there. It didn't take long to realize that they had something going on. I gave Mom both barrels because I was furious at what she was doing behind your back. Kelly did the same to Dr. Janice. Jerry said, apparently not furious enough to tell your clueless father. That brought back the waterworks, and it took Sarah several seconds to compose herself. I wanted to Daddy, but she told me that this way I could keep seeing you when you came home. If I told you and the 2 of you got divorced, she would get me, and I would hardly ever see you. Not that you were home much anyway. I didn't like it, but you and Mom hardly ever talk about anything meaningful anyway. I swear the 2 of you have just been roommates for years. This seemed like the easiest way because it meant that whenever you were home, I was here with you. I've missed you so much. This is going to sound terrible, and I feel guilty for even thinking this way, but COVID did do one great thing for me. I got to spend an entire year with my father. I know we were cooped up inside most of the time, but you were here. With me. Now Jerry felt even more guilty. It was clear that he handled the situation with his wife poorly. He had no one to blame for that. He had missed his daughter, too, but being in the same house with Linda, well, he had sucked it up for as long as he could before he started traveling. I begged her to give me this last Christmas with you. Then you would go back on the road, and she would serve you when you returned home. She said that she doesn't want anything from you. She wouldn't give me the details, but she admitted your staying away was her fault and she planned to let you keep most everything, except for a few ornaments and some kitchen things. I'm not sure why that is, except that Robert does quite well, so she doesn't need anything from you. She saw him wince at her saying that. Oh, I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't mean it that way. I know you do very well. It's just that with him being a surgeon, I just always thought that, well, you know. That maybe he did a little better, so Mom wouldn't need to try to screw you in a divorce. At least that is what she promised me. Just then Sarah's phone started playing Dierks Bentley's I Hold On, a song they both could relate to. Jerry smiled at that. She looked at her dad and returned his smile. She loved her dad. The text was from her mother. What's taking you so long? Are you okay? Sarah held her finger to her lip to tell her dad to be silent and called her mom on speaker. I'm almost done, Mom. After I sent him the files, I started looking for something different to wear to school. Dinner's almost ready. You can make do until you are back there in a few days. Hurry up. Okay. I will. Then she disconnected the call. She looked at her father. What are you going to do, Daddy? You still haven't told me when you started staying there while I was gone. He could see her blush before she said, a few months before you came home for COVID. It was Jerry's turn to flame red. He was dumbfounded. How did they manage during COVID? He wasn't home very much. When he was, he did her shopping, and she would show up for what he purchased plus a booty call. And you and Kelly knew all this? Why keep up the charade? Why keep me in the dark? Because as long as you were married to Mom, I stayed here every night that you were here. Every single night. I love you and have missed you and told Mom that if she tried to take me away from you that I would make her life a living hell. So she sucked it up during COVID and began to make her exit plans for after this Christmas. I don't know what's going to happen now. I doubt you will want her to come back home for Christmas. Jerry scoffed at that idea. Pumpkin, I think the question is, what are you going to do? I'll be here every night that you can be. I had planned to work more from home for the rest of your senior year. I don't know what I'll do after you graduate, but for the next 6 months, I'm not planning to be gone, but maybe 5 to 10 nights. Per month, she asked. In total. I've missed you, too. She was tearing up again. You aren't just saying that, are you? I've never lied to you, Sarah. I've not always been able to get home as soon as I wanted to, but I've never lied to you. Oh. I suspect that she will need to change the divorce papers to state joint custody because I plan to be here. Besides, you are old enough that you can pick what you want to do. So at this point, I think you need to think about what you want. He could see her struggling. You don't have to make a decision tonight. Just know that I want you here as much as possible, okay? I need you, too. Sarah walked over and sat next to her father and squeezed him as tightly as she could. I need you too, Daddy. I want you to think about something for me. Kelly needs help, too. You probably don't want to hear this because she's Robert's daughter, but she's like the sister I never had. So please try to be understanding. She's glad that Mom makes her dad happy, but she's as pissed off as I am over how they went about this. She thinks her mom would be pissed, too. That was a new wrinkle. I'll try to understand, Pumpkin. Head on back and calm yourself. You're going to have to tell her that you saw me. Why? Because I don't think you'll be able to compose yourself enough to fake your way through it. I don't think I could with you, but I've had plenty of practice with her. He sighed. Well, I hope you never get good at it with me. Me too. Will you think about something for me? Sure. Could Kelly stay over some? I doubt her dad will allow it, but you know I love her too, right? She's always been welcome here. Thank you. I love you so much. She squeezed him again, tightly. I love you, too. Tell Kelly that she sang beautifully last night. Sarah exclaimed, You were there? I thought you were the best one, but you know that already. I came home early just to see your last Christmas performance. I call you Pumpkin because of that Halloween costume 13 years ago, but you've always been my angel. Were those my lilies on the ground last night? I'm sorry, Sarah. When I saw your mother and Robert together, I had to get out of there or they would have had to take me to jail for breaking Robert's hands. Her smile had turned into a frown. I understand, but I'm glad you came. It means a lot that you would come home early for me. It's always been for you. I would do anything for you. You're the only reason I'm still living in this house. Good night, Daddy. I would do anything for you, too. Later that night he received a text. I faked her out tonight. I'm going to talk to Kelly, and we'll tell Mom and Robert tomorrow night. Jerry wondered if Linda would really just walk away from everything when the courts would easily give her half. The next day, Friday, he went into his office at work and asked a few colleagues who had been divorced about a family lawyer. Later, he arranged an appointment for the middle of next week. Just to protect himself, he moved some money around and grabbed several thousand in cash. Later that night he received a call from Sarah. I told Mom that you came back early and that I told you everything. She wants to talk to you. I'll send her a text. I'm not really in the mood to talk to her just yet. I understand. She took it okay. She's not upset or angry or anything. I think she's happy that it's almost over. That isn't exactly high praise for me, is it? She said you were probably only sticking around for me. It isn't as if you and she were going to counseling to try and make things work out. Which means that this could work out okay for both of you. We'll see. Have you thought about your staying here? I'm still talking to Kelly. I'll call you this weekend, okay? Okay. Just know that I want you here as much as possible. I know. Me too. Bye, Daddy. Bye, Pumpkin. That night, as he played on the piano, he should have been mourning the final stages of his marriage. Instead, he was thinking about the next 6 months with his daughter. He also thought about Annie. Saturday was the day he was supposed to arrive home, which meant Sarah was supposed to be there. He guessed everything was up in the air for the moment. Christmas was still 2 weeks away, so he hoped he could convince Sarah to come home soon. He received a text from Linda asking, If you give me a date, time, and location of your choosing, I'll have the divorce documents served at your convenience. Monday evening. 6 p.m. Here at home. Okay. I'm sorry, Jerry. He didn't reply to that. The depth of her sorrow would be shown in the divorce documents. On Sunday morning he received a text from Sarah, Meet me at our grocery store in an hour to buy groceries. I'm coming home tonight for a little over a week. I'll tell you more when I see you. He was thrilled to hear that. At the grocery store, he saw Sarah drive up, and Kelly was in the car, too. Upon seeing her, he quickly walked over to help her out of the car. She gave him a big hug. Hi, Mr. Anderson. Thank you for thinking about me the other night. I'm sorry I didn't get to see you. He thought to himself, her mother must have been a special lady because she raised a great girl. Hi Kelly, you sang wonderfully the other night. Did you come because you were worried that Sarah wouldn't be able to provide enough direction? Nope. I'm here to make sure that you and Sarah buy the things that I like. He gave her a confused look and turned to Sarah, who was grinning. That was the deal we made with Mom and her dad. We're sisters, and where I go, she goes. Flustered, Jerry fumbled out, but, won't your dad throw a fit? Could he call the cops? Geez, Dad? Trust me, okay? Trust us. We'll give you the details when we get home. It's going to be fine. Well, I'm assuming that you don't mind Kelly being with us. Of course. I love having her at our house. Turning to Kelly he said, I hope you know that.
Thanks, Mr. A. I do. I've always known that.
They had a lot of fun shopping.
The girls already had a tentative menu outlined. Jerry wasn't going to protest anything they wanted to buy.
They could clean out the store for all he cared. It looked like he was going to get to spend time with his baby, and that was all that mattered to him.
Kelly was a nice bonus. They spent a wonderful day together.
The girls were in honors and AP classes, so they had homework to do in the afternoon, but they enjoyed cooking dinner together. Jerry cleaned up, and later, he played on the piano while they sang.
It was one of the most enjoyable evenings he could remember.
Sarah told him that they were going to alternate weeks between his house and Kelly's house, with a bias towards extra time with him, since he had been away so much at the beginning of the school year. On Monday he was served as expected. The papers seemed to match what Sarah had said.
Linda was basically walking away with a few small items she wanted in her 401k. She just wanted out. That was okay because it was what he wanted, too.
Clearly, it helped him that she had been seeing and planning to marry a surgeon. He wondered if she would feel the same way if she were dating a bank teller. Then, knowing Linda, he scoffed, no way she would be dating a bank teller. One thing was certain, though, Linda wanted their marriage to be over, and Jerry was going to make out quite well as a result. He asked the girls if they had plans for Friday night and they didn't, so he surprised them by taking them to the Austin Symphony's Christmas concert. Parking is usually a pain, and since he didn't want Kelly walking a long way, he hired a limo. For the concert, he was wearing a dapper suit and the girls were in nice dresses, so afterwards they went to a high-end restaurant to celebrate.
The girls ate up all the attention. Christmas was split between the two homes, but Kelly and Sarah were inseparable. Kelly even went with Jerry and Sarah to visit his parents, who lived near Fredericksburg in the middle of Texas Hill Country, the weekend after Christmas. It was easily the happiest holiday season that he'd had since his and Linda's problems began all those years ago. During the girls' last several months of school, life went well. The divorce was finalized, and Linda and Robert made plans to get married. The girls' schooling was good, and both girls were accepted into the University of Texas in Austin. Jerry's work was productive, and true to his word, he had only a few domestic trips, none overseas. He tried to do something special for the girls at least once a month when they were with him: concerts, opera, and he even took them out to a ranch in the hill country one weekend for skeet shooting lessons, barbecue, and stargazing. They ate it up. Robert and Linda planned to take the girls to England after graduation as a gift. When they told Jerry, he asked, "I'm really not trying to play keep up with the Joneses with Robert and Linda, but would you be okay if I took you somewhere? You know I do have a bit of experience when it comes to traveling." Sarah scoffed at the last remark given how much he had been gone. "Do you have any place in mind? What would the two of you think about a couple of weeks in Australia?" At the end of the girls' graduation ceremony, before the girls arrived, Linda approached Jerry. It was the first time they had spoken face to face since before his trip to Malaysia and Singapore. She said, "Now that things have calmed down, would you be willing to talk with me for a few minutes? I know that we'll never be close, even with both girls caught in the middle, but I would appreciate just a few minutes of your time." He nodded his agreement. The girls were happy seeing the two of them talking at all and hugged all three of their parents. Several days later, Linda joined Jerry on what was now his back deck. She started, "I want to thank you for not trying to blow everything up last Christmas and letting the divorce proceed smoothly. I could have handled that better, and it was at least the second time that I let you down. I'm in a good place now, so thank you." He had thought about this conversation several times. He could be really ugly, or he could focus on what was best for the girls. He wanted to do the former. He chose to do the latter. He said, "It hurt, you know. Discovering the first affair and then the second one. Twice? Was I that big of a bastard? No. You weren't. After you caught me the first time, no matter what I tried, you made it very clear that we were only staying together for Sarah. I thought several times about filing for divorce and requesting primary custody or even joint custody, but you didn't deserve that. She didn't deserve that. She has always looked up to you, and she needed you in her life. So our lives sucked for a few years while we tried to do what was best for her."
He scoffed, "I'm not sure that what we did was what was best for her, but it meant we both got to maximize our time with her."
Thank you for that. Robert and I were preparing for me to divorce you just before COVID hit. I always wanted it to be as amicable as possible, which is why I asked for so little. COVID forced us to wait a little longer. He really was trying to protect Kelly and me. Jerry said, "Does he know about you and your 2-year-long affair with Duncan Hunter? Please tell me you're not keeping secrets." I told Robert all about it, my affair, you're sitting on the hood of my car when we exited that hotel room, and what the affair did to us and Sarah. He knows what he's getting, and I know what I'm getting in return.
He isn't exactly squeaky clean either. I believe we are both trying to do better and enter this relationship with honesty. Jerry nodded his head and muttered, "Good." Jerry thought for a moment before saying, I didn't piece this together until a few months ago one night after Kelly and Sarah returned to you.
I wasn't even really trying, and then it popped into my head. During COVID, those nights we had sex when Kelly was staying at her home, does Robert know about that? Were you waiting until Kelly was there, so she wouldn't know anything or maybe accidentally tell him?
He could see that he struck a nerve. He saw the anxiousness spread across her face, and suddenly she was fearful.
I'll take that as a no, don't worry. I won't say anything.
Besides, it's too confusing to determine who you were really married to at the time.
Believe it or not, I still loved you. Not the way we once did, but I did. I'm sorry. I could say that I was doing it for you, but that would be a lie.
I wanted to be with you on those nights, so sue me for having sex with my husband. You may not believe me, but even now, I love you and would be willing to give us another go if you agreed, just like I know that Robert would love to have his late wife back. Robert and I would probably survive if you told him about the sex, but I hope you won't.
No need to worry, I won't. Not for me, nor you, nor him.
And trust me, I'd really like to hurt him, but I won't say anything because this is the happiest that I've seen Sarah and Kelly in years.
This is about them, not us. Understand? I do. Thank you.
He said, for the last several months, I've just been trying to bring as much joy into their lives as possible. Maybe it hasn't been fair to the two of you that they've spent so much time with me, but I've not taken that for granted.
We know you haven't.
A little extra alone time for me and Robert has been good.
Since they are going to college here, we'll see plenty of them, and we have the upcoming trip. I know they are looking forward to it. I'm glad you are getting the opportunity, also. Thanks, Jerry. You aren't perfect, but you were a good husband and an even better father. I hope you find someone that can make you PPY.
I appreciate that, Linda. He had been so bitter for so long he struggled to return a satisfactory compliment. I hope Robert and you can be happy.
Sarah loves you. She wants to love you, so remember that. Thank you for saying that. I guess I'll go now.
Take care of yourself, sweetie. It irritated him to hear her call him that, but he managed to remain emotionless.
He was trying to be nice for the girls. You too, Linda. The girls had a good trip to England.
They FaceTimed with him several times. They did all the usual stops in London. He wondered why England, but didn't bother to ask. The girls had a great time and told him all about it when they got back. A couple of weeks after their return from England, it was time to go to Australia. Even with 2 weeks, you cannot expect to see everything in Australia, which is almost as big as the continental United States. Since it was summer in the Northern Hemisphere, it was winter in Australia.
They packed accordingly.
They started in Sydney and did the usual touristy things, including doing a harbour tour by boat and going to the top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, using the handicap lift for Kelly, since it would have been impossible for her to climb to the top of the bridge.
She enjoyed the view, anyway.
Jerry took the girls shopping for dresses to wear to a performance at the Sydney Opera House. There were plenty of museums and other attractions, including a picnic in the botanical gardens.
They spent 2 nights at a resort in the Blue Mountains north of Sydney.
The crisp cool air was quite the contrast compared to what they had experienced recently in Austin. The resort had kangaroos on site, and the girls were able to hold a baby kangaroo and a koala. After Sydney, they spent 2 nights up north in Cairns so they could see the Great Barrier Reef and enjoy the beach, which was still comfortably warm. Jerry had arranged a glass-bottom boat to view the reef. None of them had scuba experience and didn't really feel like they could learn and enjoy at the same time in a single day. Jerry could afford the scuba expense, but it was eye-watering. The girls wore their swimsuits and cover-ups, which included Kelly wearing some patterned, diaphanous cover-up pants to hide her left leg. When the boat owners broke out the snorkeling gear, she looked mortified. She would need to remove her cover-up, which would expose her scars. "Mr. A, I can't. My leg." He had spoken to Sarah about this and knew it was coming. If she refused to budge, they would enjoy the boat. No big deal, but he would try. "Kelly, including the 3 of us, there are only 6 people on this boat, 3 of whom you'll never see again. It will be okay. I promise. It's hideous. I don't even like looking at it. The fish won't care." She smiled at that. Sarah and Jerry watched her struggle with what to do. She said, "The 2 of you can go without me." Leaving an attractive 18-year-old Kelly on a boat with 3 strange men wasn't going to happen. Sarah said, "Nope. While we are here in Australia, we are the 3 musketeers. It's all for one and one for all. So either you come, or I'll start applying the suntan lotion." Once again, she was looking between Jerry and Sarah, her eyes pleading with them to not go. He continued, "Besides, this may be your one and only chance to see the Great Barrier Reef up close. How many people do you know that will be able to say that?" They could see her defenses weakening. She let out a long breath and whispered, "Okay." They had a great time. They would come out of the water just long enough to reapply the sunscreen to their backs. Most of the time they merrily floated or kicked around to view the incredible reef. A few times they free-dived deeper, holding their breaths as long as they could before resurfacing. As expected, the reef was a kaleidoscope of colors and life and breathtakingly gorgeous. At the end of the day, Kelly hugged everyone on the boat. She was so happy that she had decided to go for it. The next day at their beachfront hotel was a similar scene. On the beach, they set up their chairs under the long row of tall palm trees. A waiter was nearby taking drink and food orders. It was an exclusive resort, so it wasn't very crowded. Kelly was happily laying out in her bikini top but didn't want to take off her cover-up pants. After a lot of back and forth, Kelly said, "It's repulsive. Nobody wants to see this leg. I can scare small children away with this leg, and some adults, too." Sarah replied, "Sis, it's just like yesterday. You'll never see any of these people again. Why would you care what they may think?" Jerry replied, "Kelly, did you know that I love this leg of yours? It is one of the most beautiful legs on the beach today." "Why?" "Because it is attached to you. One of these days you are going to meet a man that is going to love this leg even more than I do. If you give him a chance, he's going to love it and treasure it because it belongs to you. So you don't need to hide it. There are enough challenges in life, don't place even more restrictions on yourself because of your injury. It's embarrassing. I don't even like rubbing lotion on it. Then let me. I'd be happy to apply lotion on such a lovely leg." Once again, she looked back and forth between Sarah, who was just grinning, and Jerry, who was looking at her as if he was her dad. She rolled her eyes, "I cannot believe I'm going to do this." "Fine." Nervously, Kelly removed her cover-up and Jerry sat on the edge of her chair, expectantly. "What are you doing, Mr. A? I told you I would rub lotion on your leg for you." "Oh. It's okay. I've got it. I've come this far. I think I can do that." He held out his hand for Sarah to hand him the lotion. She gave it to him, and as he began to apply it, Kelly said, "Mr. A, I can." He shushed her. It wasn't a pretty sight. Scars crisscrossed her leg like a patchwork of spiderwebs from her knee to her toes. Her calf muscles and those on the front of her leg were misshaped, and her foot and toes looked crooked. She was lucky she could wear regular shoes at all. She could only wear heels for a couple of hours before the pain was unbearable, but she would wear them if the occasion called for them, defiantly.
Jerry said, as I told you, this leg is loved. You are loved. The people that matter think you are beautiful. Why are you so worried about what anyone else thinks? She had heard some version of that several times over the years. It didn't mean much coming from her dad or her grandparents. Coming from Mr. A? Well, that was different. It was food for thought. She wondered, if he and Sarah were good with it, why did it matter what anyone else thought? She said, "Thank you, Mr. A. Thank you for loving me the way you do. The pleasure has always been mine. Thank you for being so good for Sarah when her parents weren't really providing her a loving example." She smiled back, "She's my sister. What else was I gonna do? Besides, she couldn't tie her shoes without me." Hey! I heard that. They all broke into laughter at that. It was wonderful to watch her worries and concerns fall away on the beach. They could tell that she enjoyed herself that day. They hoped she would leave those worries there. Not wanting to take her cane into the water, Jerry picked her up and carried her. She kissed his cheek many, many times the rest of the day. After Cairns, they flew to Melbourne for the rest of their trip. Much more shopping and eating ensued. Since entering Australia, he had been letting them drink a little since the drinking age was 18. Jerry even took them to a club one night. Sarah would only dance when Kelly was out there with her, so usually just one song with a lot of support from Sarah or the guy she danced with. It was actually painful for Kelly, but she was glad she did it. For dinner one evening, he took them to Eureka 89, the highest restaurant in the Southern Hemisphere. The views were tremendous. It had been a great 2 weeks, but it was time to return home. The girls needed to begin preparing for their first year of college. None of them were looking forward to the long flight, but Jerry had cashed in every frequent flyer point he had to upgrade the three of them to first class. As they entered the Melbourne airport to fly home, the girls could see Jerry taking a look around. "What ya lookin' at, Dad?" Sarah asked. "I need to tell you too about what happened the last time I played on the piano in the Singapore airport." Annie was still trying to wipe the wine from her chin in the table. She couldn't believe what Beverly had shown her. It was one thing to carry around inside of her the tiny spark that had made such a difference in her life, but it was quite another for it to be plastered across a dozen Melbourne billboards. It said, "American airport pianist. Previously lost in Sydney. Seeks amazing Aussie redhead vocalist for long-term act. Must be able to sing Christmas carols and have desire to see a white Christmas. Auditions at Melbourne Tullamarine Airport." J. Annie? Are you okay? Trying to recover and not let on that the message was meant for her, she said sorry. Sorry. Then she started laughing. Since I'm a redhead, it hit a little close to home. I can just imagine the number of wrongas that are throwing themselves at this guy. The why I don't know. Being from America, he's probably loud, boorish, narcissistic, blissfully ignorant, and weighs well over 20 stones. She needed to throw them off the scent. Willa, yet another friend, said, "I thought you didn't like the term wronga." Anyway, I doubt he's the way you described. On the radio, some of the ladies have already said he's a keeper. If he just wanted any redhead to steal away from here, or even an attractive one, he'd be long gone by now. Whoever he is, this guy's waiting for someone. Ha! Maybe it's you, Annie. You aren't having a secret affair with an American, are why? Oh, you? When's the last time you've used that voice of yours? Right. You know me. The only people from overseas that I've spent much time with are in Vietnam or New Zealand. Besides, he'd never want this fat arse. Sorry, girls. There have been plenty of blokes admiring your fat arse tonight, and those jeans do nothing to hide it either. So, you may not be the one he's looking for, but he's not going to turn you away because of your appearance. Annie rolled her eyes and asked, "How long has he been here? Does he just play all day at the airport?" Nat replied, "Those billboards have been up for 2 weeks. They say he plays every day from 6 p.m. until midnight. The airport must be in on it somehow because there wasn't a piano there before he arrived, and it plays by itself when he isn't there." I'm sure they are happy for the entertainment. That conversation happened at about 8 p.m. An hour later, Annie was making her excuses to leave. Where you going, girl? Sneaking off to the airport, joked Beverly. You caught me. I want to get there before he's gone. The girls all laughed, then Annie continued, Mike is going to be out late with his mates, so I'm spending the night at my mom's. I don't want to get to her place too late. Annie placed a few bills onto the table and said goodbye to her friends. It took all of her self-control not to run out of the restaurant. She hailed a taxi and instructed the driver to take her to the airport. She was incredibly nervous. She knew that she needed to go to her mom's and think about what she should do. So many things were up in the air at the moment: her marriage, her job, and now Jerry. She allowed herself to whisper, Jerry. It was the first time she had actually uttered the word since she left Singapore. She had thought it many times. She had carried the boost he had given her for the past year. It and her hard work in Vietnam were what had really propelled her forward. This is crazy, she thought. Several times she almost told the taxi driver to turn around, but she didn't. When she reached the airport, instead of being dropped at the main entrance, she entered through a door a little further away. As soon as she stepped inside, her breath caught because she could hear the piano over the regular airport noises, even from that distance. Slowly, she worked her way towards the sound of the music, Christmas carols, of course, even if it was a few weeks early. She could see Jerry at the piano playing. She thought to herself, every day for 2 weeks, hours each day. He's been waiting for me to show. Annie was touched to her very being over a man searching and waiting so patiently for her. He and the piano were facing the main entrance. She could see his tablet on top, auto-turning the pages for him as he played. Every few seconds he would look up at the doors and through the large glass windows, scanning for her. It nearly brought tears to her eyes. She knew it was going to be complicated. She was still married and had a new job offer. Was he still married? What about his job that had him traveling so much? Yet, here he was, for her. She was a different woman than the one he met in Singapore. She felt better about herself, more confident in her own worth and capabilities. Most of that was because her career had started to take off, and a lot of that was due to a tiny spark that kept her going shortly after her return. Given the radio brouhaha over the billboards, she wondered if anyone was still watching him. A couple of little girls were singing Jingle Bells with him. He was actually smiling, a happy smile, and singing. Maybe he had changed some, too. He had the girls cackling after singing Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. She suspected that must be a particularly American song, because she had never heard it before, but the girls seemed to love it. Their parents shepherded them towards ticketing, and he resumed his playing. After thinking a few more seconds, she had made her decision and approached him from behind. As he began playing White Christmas, she stepped next to him and began to sing. Like in Singapore, he was surprised but only missed 1 or 2 notes while he continued playing. She could see the grin spread across his face as he looked down at the keys. It took all her control to keep from tearing up. A small crowd gathered to watch before shuffling onto their destination. A few whispered and wondered if Annie was the one that he was looking for. They left unsure because the two performers never spoke. They just performed together, as if they had been together for years. Jerry was waiting, patiently. Not knowing Annie's situation, he would let her make the first move, while second, or was it the third by now? He desperately wanted to jump up from the bench, scoop her up into his arms, and carry her away with him, but he knew that he couldn't. They performed for nearly 30 minutes before she touched his shoulder and whispered, "Meet me here at noon tomorrow." He tightly nodded a brief affirmation, and she was gone. He had been hoping for the last 2 weeks that she would appear. He would have stuck around 2 more weeks before calling off his pursuit. He wanted to follow after her or at least call out to her, but he continued his playing. Had anyone been paying attention, they would have noticed that his playing was more alive than before she showed up. The few that were still watching were wowed when he poured his heart into David Hickens' version of Carol of the Bells, or at least the best he could do on that very technical piece. He had been practicing it a lot, hoping. He was feeling good, and it showed.
At midnight, just like the past 2 weeks, he slowly rose from the bench, closed the cover, and returned to his hotel room at the airport, as nervous and hopeful as was Annie.
Annie didn't go home that night.
She texted Mike, "I'm staying with Mum tonight.
Don't get too rowdy." Honestly, she no longer cared.
She didn't want to see him hurt, but she had made her decision. Whether or not anything came of her and Jerry, she was leaving Mike.
Worst case scenario, she was moving to Sydney. Best case? Who knows?
She and her mom stayed up well past midnight talking. It was the best talk they'd had in a long time. Her mom had noticed her self-confidence growing and was so pleased to see that. She, too, nearly spit out her drink when Annie told her that she was the woman the Billboard pianist had been seeking.
Annie told her everything. Mum asked, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "You must have some idea. Maybe he could give you children." She laughed. "Mom, is that all you think about?"
They both chuckled, but that thought had crossed Annie's mind many times in the last few hours. She had a fitful sleep, anxiously anticipating the coming meeting. The next morning, she hurried home to get ready.
Mike wasn't there.
She wasn't sure what to wear. She wasn't going to a hotel room, so she wasn't dressing sexy. She scoffed, "As if I could appear sexy." Then she thought, "But he might think I am." Nevertheless, she knew that she was still married, temporarily, and she dressed like she did the previous night for her girlfriends. If Mike, or anyone else, saw her, she would say she was going into the office, which everyone would believe. Once at the airport, she quickly spotted him leaning against a column reading on his phone.
He looked up at her and smiled and asked, "Lunch?" She nodded and they caught a taxi together.
She raised an eyebrow when he gave the driver the destination he desired. Not a word was spoken between them until they were away from the airport, when she said, "I cannot believe that you came for me.
I've thought about you so often since Singapore. I didn't allow myself to think anything was possible until recently.
If you are here now, then I'm guessing that either your marriage isn't great, or you are about to shoo me away.
I'll be getting a divorce soon.
If things were better, either I wouldn't have come, or I would have sent a friend to deliver a message that I wasn't coming.
So, what now?"
He chuckled. "We're going to eat lunch together and finish the talk that we started nearly a year ago."
"I'm not the same person I was a year ago."
"You helped give me confidence that I had been missing."
"I'm not the same person either. I'm no longer drowning."
He took her to Eureka 89 for lunch on the 89th floor of Eureka Tower. He had liked it when he and the girls ate there. It was posh without being totally pretentious. The views were amazing. Not knowing if she had ever been there, he hoped she liked it. He said, "I brought my girls here during a 2-week tour of Australia. Melbourne was our last stop, and we really enjoyed it. We splurged one night and ate here."
"You came here, to Australia?" "I happen to know a lovely woman from Melbourne."
"I didn't get to see her, but I liked her town."
She asked, "Two girls?" "I thought you only had one. My daughter's best friend adopted me."
"They are both staying at my house for now since starting college." She thought him lucky that in less than a year, he had gone from one daughter to two.
She asked, "You're no longer married?"
"Nope." He told her about everything from the surprise he received when he got home early, through the girls' graduation, the trip to Australia, and their starting college. His work was going well, too. She told him about her past year, her growth personally and professionally, and the new job offer.
She asked, "What now? Is this where you whisk me away to America and make me your woman?" "Ha! No.
It sounds like this is where I ask you if we can find an apartment together in Sydney while I look for a new job."
"You would do that for me? Move halfway around the world."
"What about your daughter, or, well, daughters?" He replied, "They really liked Australia.
They will come to visit us during their breaks. And maybe we can visit them from time to time." She was cute. Yet after that, thinking, what if the other is what I want? What if I want to be swept off my feet and taken to Austin? Could you make that happen, too? I would do my best.
They need lots of CPAs in Austin, so I'm sure you would have no trouble working if that's what you want. If you prefer to do something else, we can make that happen, too.
As soon as your divorce is finalized, we'll have to start the immigration paperwork.
You're serious?
I wouldn't be here if I weren't. Can you give me a few days to think?
We probably shouldn't be seen together again until I tell Mike that we're finished, which I'll do today or tomorrow.
Then can you and I talk some more?
Of course.
I completely understand.
I'll play at the airport for several more days just so nobody suspects anything. I think the airport has liked having me there, or at least the piano, which can play itself when I'm not there.
I still cannot believe that you are here.
Those billboards must have cost a small fortune. If we are able to give a relationship our best shot, it will have been worth every penny. She said, I should probably go.
Can I have your cell phone number and I'll call you in a couple of days?
Sure. She stood to leave and he squeezed her hand.
Annie?
She turned to look at him, still holding his hand. You're beautiful. He welcomed the smile she gave him in reply. She had held that simple phrase inside her for months, drawing on it occasionally for strength.
This time was different. She could allow herself to enjoy the feeling, not needing to secretly hide it away.
This time, she could bask in the warmth of that statement, feeling the desire that he had for her, and she for him. This time, as she walked away from him, she could swish her ass and not feel guilty, nor concerned about how he might view it. This time, she felt good, confident, almost complete. This time, as she strode away, anyone that looked at her could see that she was glowing because that small spark she had carried for so long was now a roaring fire. She told Mike later that afternoon that she was divorcing him. He only protested a little. Her shining star, which seemed to be shining brightly that afternoon, was making him appear dim by comparison. She spent time talking with her mom and her manager, and then she needed to have the discussion with Jerry. It took almost 3 years for Annie and Jerry to get where they truly wanted to be, but it was a great journey getting there. Yet again, he was on the piano with a couple of girls singing for him as Annie approached.
This time was a little different, though.
Upon further investigation, she and Jerry discovered that it would take a little time for her to immigrate to the US, 7 to 13 months depending on if they applied for a fiancé visa or marriage visa. They decided that she would take the job in Sydney, committing to her company for 2 years, while they worked on the immigration paperwork.
Jerry went with her to Sydney and worked with clients in Oceania and Southeast Asia while there.
They married in Melbourne, and Sarah, Kelly, and his family flew in for the nuptials.
Annie's friends couldn't believe that she and Jerry were the couple from the billboard.
Annie's mom, a tough old boot if ever there was one, nearly cried the first time that Sarah and Kelly called her Nana. Jerry had been able to work more from home, wherever that was, because he stepped back from some of his responsibilities even though it meant the bonuses were not quite the same. The reason he could afford that was because many years earlier he had noticed that almost every company where he implemented a new system saw their productivity increase significantly within a year of completion. Knowing that he and Linda were having problems, he had opened a few brokerage accounts overseas to stash a few bucks should their divorce turn ugly. He had used long-term, 12 months, stock options to bet on the companies he had helped. The size of his company's billings to the client was large enough to show up in their financial statements, so the options he purchased couldn't be considered insider trading. No, he didn't become a billionaire or a megamillionaire, but he had enough saved that he could dictate more of his travel than he had in the past. If he were smart, he would be able to retire or cut back even more, in just 5 more years. That worked out well because as soon as he and Annie talked about kids, they began trying and succeeding in having them. When she immigrated to the US, they already had one, Patrick, and a second one was on the way. Having always wanted to travel, she and Jerry began making plans to do that, with their kids. The more the merrier. She had no trouble finding a part-time accounting job in Austin. Jerry had kept his old house, which Sarah and Kelly were still sharing while they attended college at UT. They loved Linda and Robert, but it was with Jerry that they felt most comfortable. They became fast friends with Annie and loved their little stepbrother. It was Christmas Eve, and Annie was entering the music room with little Patrick on her hip. Her big belly, which contained the expected Anna, preceded her into the room. Jerry was playing, and her stepdaughters were singing beautifully. When she joined in, the three turned to smile at her. Mum was there, too, for the upcoming birth of Anna. She has been a happy visitor. For Annie, it was the happiest she could remember being. Jerry, too. She was so thankful that she stepped forward that late night in Singapore to share a little Christmas cheer with the stranger playing the piano. She had been given, or maybe taken, a second chance. Jerry had done the same. This time it truly paid off. The seed for this story was the idea of strangers meeting in an airport. My nephew told me about the piano at Changi because he played on it for a while. When he stood to leave, an elderly lady that had been listening to him asked him if he could play a couple more. Being the southern gentleman that he is, he obliged her request and then politely ran to catch his flight. I've always liked the ships passing in the night them, and this story is the result. Besides, I'm a hopeful romantic at heart, so sue me. Thanks for sticking with this. I have many more that I'll be publishing over the next month or so, some are quite a bit longer. I hope to entertain you sufficiently for you to stick around and read, and hopefully enjoy. Your time and attention are some of the most valuable things you can give to someone. That you would share a little time on one of my stories is appreciated, always. Want to read something that I thought was great? Check out Chasen's The Corner Table at Mickey's. It is a long story but an excellent one.